Welcome back to another episode of True Crime with Lux. Today's case has a lot of twists and turns and is a bit of a mystery as to what really happened. So today I'm going to be talking about Charles Morgan, who went by the nickname Chuck, so that's how I'll be referring to him. And he was just a businessman who owned an escrow company in Arizona. Now, going back to his childhood, he was born March 16th of 1938 in Everett, Washington. His parents were Leonard and Doris Morgan, and he also had a younger sibling. Not long after he was born, the family decided to move to Tucson, Arizona. Chuck married his wife, Ruth, in 1958, and they had 4 daughters together. Friends would describe him as a very hard worker and an all-around family man. He ended up taking a job with the county escrow service, where he was an agent and he would look over accounts and work with the clients one-on-one. One day, he did get into a disagreement with his supervisor, which ended up with him being fired for insubordination. Very out of the blue, because he hadn't had any run-ins or issues beforehand. He decided to take this opportunity, and he got a loan for $30,000 and purchased a controlling interest in statewide escrow services. He had a plan of building this company up. In order to do this, he actually ended up taking a 3rd mortgage out on his home, and the bank found this kind of suspicious, so it was put on hold, which delayed his plans. It was later discovered that this hold was to convince Chuck to help them on an investigation that the lender he was working with, they were investigating. After having everything explained to him, Chuck did agree to give testimony, and they released the hold of the money. He told a few close friends that after testifying, he started to fear for his life. Like the lender company was going to come after him for testifying against them. Even though he was offered protection for himself and his family, he denied it, even with these fears. Now, this is where the story gets a bit crazy, in my opinion. On March 22nd of 1977, Chuck went missing. 3 days later, around 2 in the morning, his wife Ruth heard a noise at the back door. She went to see what it was, and she found Chuck standing there. He was missing one of his shoes and had a plastic cuff around one ankle. She could see that his hands were also handcuffed. She tried asking what happened to him, but he was unable to talk. So she got him something to write on, and he told her that he had been drugged and abducted by someone he didn't know. He didn't go into any more detail than that, really, though. He told her not to call the police or tell anyone what happened because that would just be signing a death warrant for their entire family. She then spent the next week taking care of him until he was able to talk again. Ruth said after he was able to talk to her, he would say things to her like he was a secret agent. And he was working for the federal government who was undercover to stop organized crime. She didn't know much about his business to begin with, or what he really did with escrow, but this just seemed way out there for her to comprehend. So she didn't know what to make of this confession of being a secret agent for the government. After everything that Chuck went through of the abduction, he started wearing a bulletproof vest everywhere he went. He also wouldn't let anyone but himself take and pick up his daughters from school. Chuck did end up talking to a friend who was also an employee with him, Jeff Tuberville, and he shared things with him that he hadn't told Ruth yet. Chuck said that the people who took him also stole 7 platinum bars from the trunk of his car. They were around $50,000. Now, he never explained why he even had them on him to begin with, like why were they in the trunk of your car? And it kind of became a thing where his stories were different. Depending on who he talked to, what occurred during his abduction would change. And it just seemed like the details were getting crazier and crazier. As time went by, he became more paranoid. And he started keeping a gun on himself and even kept some in his car. He had a police scanner installed as well so that he could hear and monitor all of the criminal activity going on around him. He also had a special locking mechanism put onto the car so that the only way to unlock it was to hit a release under the front fender. Now, 2 months later, Chuck disappeared again. He was supposed to have a meeting at work, and he even called the office to let them know, hey, I'll be there in about 30 minutes for the meeting. But he never showed up, and no one heard from him again that day. This time, Ruth immediately called the police. Unfortunately, since there was no evidence of a crime and Chuck was actually an adult who can do whatever he wants and didn't have to answer his phone if he didn't want to, they couldn't do much at the time. 9 days after he disappeared, Ruth received a phone call. She didn't recognize the woman on the other end, so she was very confused. The woman told her Chuck is all right, then said Ecclesiastes 12, 1-8, before the woman just hung up the phone. Ruth said the Bible verse at first didn't really have any meaning to her. As far as she knew, Chuck didn't have anything with that verse either. But there was a part that kinda stuck in her mind. The verse reads, "Men are afraid of a high place and of terrors on the road. Remember him before the silver cord is broken and the golden bowl is crushed. Then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it." 11 days later, Chuck's body was found in the desert. He had been shot in the back of the head with what later would be confirmed his own gun. He was still wearing his bulletproof vest, and the gun was found next to his body. There didn't seem to be any signs of a struggle, and there weren't any footprints around the scene, aside from Chuck's. Now, during the investigation, they did search his car, and they found one of his teeth in the back seat that had been wrapped inside of a handkerchief. Chuck didn't have any injuries to his face that would explain how he had lost this tooth, or why it would be in the car, or why it would be wrapped up in the back seat. Now, during the autopsy, his time of death was put 12 hours prior to being found, and he had been missing for a month, which left investigators wondering, where had he been? The bullet had entered the back of his head, and it stopped right behind his teeth. When they processed the gun, they found no fingerprints on it, but they did have gunshot residue on Chuck's hand. And it was strange because it was found on Chuck's left hand. Ruth informed the police that Chuck was right-handed, so it wouldn't make sense that he would take his own life using his left hand. She said he wasn't very good with anything when it came to using his left hand. He struggled. The next thing that they found was a $2 bill pinned to his underwear, and this bill had writing on the front and the back of it. The things that were written on the front were 7 Spanish names, and above those were a Bible verse. The same Bible verse that lady had called Ruth and told her about. On the back of the money was a map drawing that led to an area between Tucson and Mexico. The towns were Robles Junction and Sala City, which were known for smuggling. At the scene, there was no real evidence to show if his death was a murder, and his autopsy couldn't prove whether or not Chuck took his own life or was killed by somebody else. Not knowing what really happened, they did investigate it. It did frustrate the police, though, because much of this case seemed to be a mystery. Even going back to the first time that Chuck disappeared, there were so many unanswered questions. The physical evidence was pointing towards him doing this himself, but there were other factors that just made you question if that was the whole story. I can see why, due to the lack of evidence, why they were leaning more towards him doing it himself, but at the same time, it doesn't make sense. One, why would he still be wearing his bulletproof vest? Why did he drive to the desert? Why did he even bother getting out of the car and walking away from it? What did his tooth in the back seat, where did that come from? And then why would he use his left hand, which he struggled to use on a daily basis, to then put the gun to the back of his head? It just seems more complicated than it could have been. Police believe the area he died in was too public for somebody else to have taken Chuck there and done it. And they assumed that whoever would have killed him probably would have searched his car, looking for something. And there was no sign that the car had been gone through before the police had been the one to go through it. Their next theory was that sometimes Chuck would throw himself into his work so much that he would have a mental breakdown from the stress. So they thought maybe this was an episode. Maybe he reached his breaking point and was just so stressed out, and this was the only answer he had. Most people who were close with Chuck didn't believe that that would be a possibility. However, other people who were kind of acquaintances with him, they thought maybe there was something behind him taking his own life. They said that Chuck cared a lot about what other people saw of him and what they thought of him. It was said that he would sometimes cause problems at work just so he could look like a hero when he solved it, and that he also had some financial troubles that he didn't really talk about, but if you paid close enough attention, you could see that he was struggling with money. A month into investigating Chuck's death and not getting any leads or tips, the sheriff's department released a statement saying that they were considering Chuck's death a suicide. They explained that at the scene, the only fingerprints and footprints belonged to Chuck, and that there was no sign of a struggle. The weapon used was his own gun at close range, which they found lying next to his body, and his left hand had gunshot residue on it. They also discovered that Chuck was in financial debt, that included $40,000 and a third mortgage on his home. They concluded maybe this was just too much for him to handle and he couldn't see a way out. With all of that, his death was still ruled as unknown. His wife, along with family and close friends, still believe that somebody else did this, that Chuck wouldn't take his own life. There was more to this story. Ruth said if Chuck did want to take his own life or had decided this was the only way out, he would have left a letter for her and their daughters. He would have said goodbye to them. There are still theories out there, and a lot of it involved Chuck working with the government. Was it true? Was it not true? Did this play a role? Maybe it was a murder and they were trying to make it look like a suicide, but didn't know that he was right-handed when they did all of this. Maybe something went wrong. Maybe he was an agent and his cover got blown. In 2006, Ruth passed away from cancer. Her daughter said that she always believed, to the day that she died, that Chuck was murdered and his killer was out there. It's just, you don't know what to believe. There is so many holes and so many things that just don't make sense, that I could see why there's a question of, did somebody do this and try to cover it up? Or was he really in the state of a mental breakdown and just wasn't thinking clearly when he drove out there? Maybe we'll never know. I want to thank you all for joining me and hearing Chuck's case. Please remember to follow and subscribe to the podcast. It really helps me out and I appreciate it. I hope everybody has a great day and you stay safe. And I will be seeing you and talking to you next week.